From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. Last summer, the high fashion world was unexpectedly excited about a piece of food.
It was a picture of, I believe it's a heritage tomato, a sort of ridged, plump, juicy-looking, bisected heritage tomato of the sort you might see in a Provençal market.
Quite.
Definitely not in a British supermarket. And someone put it online with the caption, I think it says something like, "Why is this tomato so Loewe?" Which is sort of baffling, I think, and esoteric.
It's like saying this cucumber is so Burberry.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely wouldn't be a cucumber.
No.
But it was picked up instantly online. It became this sort of kind of much retweeted meme. It went everywhere because it really hit a nerve among people who like labels. It really did sort of encapsulate what the designer at Loewe, J.W. Anderson, had managed to do. J.W. Anderson's approach has turned it from what was quite a sleepy, quiet Spanish leather goods label to the hypiest label probably in the world at the moment. He's made it instantly recognisable, off-kilter, very cool.
Anderson, the designer, knows how to turn this into big business.
What he did, I think 2 or 3 days after that, was post on his own Instagram a picture of his hand holding a prototype tomato clutch bag in the same shape as that very luscious ridged heritage fruit that we mentioned earlier.
After 11 years at Loewe, taking annual sales from £230 million to over £1 billion, he's off to Dior. The first time one person has been creative director of the whole thing since old Christian Dior himself. So who is Jonathan Anderson? From tomatoes to handbags to soon showing the French how fashion is done. The story today, the British designer with the biggest job in fashion.
I'm Harriet Walker, fashion editor at The Times.
Harriet, we're talking about Jonathan Anderson. Who is he? He's British, but where from?
Jonathan Anderson is a Northern Irish designer who grew up in Londonderry. He is the son of a Northern Irish rugby player, and his mum taught in a secondary school. He was diagnosed with quite severe dyslexia as a teenager, and he went from school there to studying fashion.
Let's see another walk. The way in which I work is very on the body. I'm actually dyslexic, so I find, for me, I need to work 3D.
You worked as a window dresser, is that right, at one point?
In fashion, we like to say visual merchandise.
Oh, beg your pardon.
And it wasn't just any windows nor any dressing, because he worked in Milan under Prada's visual merchandiser, Manuela Pavesi.
This wasn't M&S.
It certainly wasn't. And this woman, Manuela Pavesi, that he worked for, has really been credited with changing how window displays work, which to the layperson, that might sound quite funny, but it's high concept, it's dramatic, and it's the ultimate push to buy. And I think that that's really key in how Jonathan Anderson designs. He knows what he's doing.
It was 2008 that Anderson launched his own brand, J.W. Anderson, and was soon turning the right heads.
There was a London Fashion Week season, I think it was 2011 or 2012, when 3 different Vogue editors turned up at a show wearing a head-to-toe J.W. Anderson look, and that was the moment. I mean, many people still hadn't heard his name by then. That was the moment when I think I realised, OK, this guy's going to be something special in London and possibly beyond.
So how does it grow?
Yeah, so Anderson became one of those designers at London Fashion Week, the ticket that everyone wanted to get. And I think that was because what he managed to do was marry London's reputation for being very quirky and avant-garde and quite experimental with things that you could wear.
Yes.
Things that were sort of designed to deliberately be off the peg.
London is never going to be Milan or Paris. It has to be something else. Do you know what I mean? There's no point being a follower.
He was sort of helped in that venture by the sponsor for young designers at London Fashion Week at the time was Topshop. He then designed a sort of capsule collaboration range that was more democratically priced, shall we say, that was available in Topshop. But even then, that was very early days. He'd still managed to create this hype before any of those pieces even dropped, because his shows were just really cool. And it was stuff that seemed instantly wearable, but not familiar. For example, there was a menswear show in 2013 where he basically repurposed sort of traditionally feminine sort of details on clothing, frills, bandeau tops, and put them on men. There were these sort of shorts with like frills around the bottom, almost like knickerbockers. And I don't know many men who would wear that, but I knew lots of fashion women who went out and bought it as soon as they could.
JW Anderson started off as a menswear brand. It then progressed into women's. The men's and the women's were being sampled at the same time, so it ended up, they kind of started to look the same. And that's where the brand kind of started to get more steam.
So was it a surprise then when he moved from doing all of that to fusty old Spanish leather pushers, Loewe?
I don't know whether it was fusty. I think Loewe just wasn't a household name at that point. They had brought in various designers on a sort of seasonal basis, I think, to try and oomph it a bit. But it took someone, I think, like Anderson coming in with this kind of visual merch background, a fashion degree. He was a very up-and-coming name. What was interesting was, I think, how much scope LVMH, the parent company of Loewe, were prepared to give him.
And that's the big French conglomerate. Was it Louis Vuitton? Moet
Yeah,
Hennessy?
it's Bernard Arnault's company, the richest. Well, sometimes he's the richest man in the world. It depends what's going on at Tesla.
Yeah, quite. And so Jonathan Anderson at Loewe, we mentioned earlier the viral tomato. It seems like he did have a finger on the viral pulse, was able to create those moments.
I guess what he did during his time at Loewe that I think is interesting, and not that many other people in fashion had twigged this early on, is that he, I think, fully intended to marry a very rarefied customer in the art world with the online hype of zeitgeisty trends on the internet, on Instagram and on TikTok. He created a cardigan for Harry Styles at his own brand, JW Anderson, which sold out everywhere. And then he sold the kit of how to knit it yourself at home. Which
is sort of so TikTok friendly.
Well, I don't know whether it was at TikTok prices, but yes.
I see, yes.
There's definitely an eye on making fashion into something you can be part of, the sort of community vibe. And he does that through partnering, I think, with lots of artists as well. But he also does it by the sort of people that he includes in his ad campaigns, such as Maggie Smith, who was in a recent Loewe campaign. And Daniel Craig was in another one recently, and everyone exclaimed at his sort of long floppy hair and funny cardi that he had on.
And interesting that you'd think Maggie Smith modelling a handbag doesn't scream viral sensation, but there was something about her towards the end of her life at that point, looking quite old, but in some like absolutely extra fur coat, clutching this big bag,
totally
set the internet on fire in a way that I wouldn't have expected.
Totally. I think he understands that people want something different from fashion. You know, there are many brands out there with very thin young people looking gorgeously toned in a bikini, for example, while also holding a handbag. I think he has this quirky, eccentric interest that I think is quite British as well, in making fashion something different, something fun, and creating these sort of talking point moments.
But also it seems he hasn't been afraid to break out into other pop culture areas that you might not necessarily normally find high fashion, like, you know, costume design for films and even Super Bowl performances.
Yes, absolutely. He isn't someone to be hemmed in. He created a look for Rihanna during the Super Bowl concert, the halftime show, where she revealed to the world that she was pregnant, and this was an outfit that sculpted her changing figure very carefully, but it was also a very, this wasn't sort of maternity wear. It's a very powerful look. And
it wasn't big baggy trousers.
Absolutely not the smock, not a Princess Diana smock.
Yeah.
It was a very powerful moment that, again, created a sort of globally impactful image, I think, that lots of women were really pleased to see. And yeah, he's moved into costume design as well. He did the costumes in the Zendaya film Challengers about tennis.
Which was, again, really chic, hot, sweaty, summery.
Yes. He's good friends with the director. He's often at the shows. I think what was most successful about the costumes in Challengers is the T-shirt that once again went completely viral. It's a grey mauve T-shirt, very simple. It says, "I told ya" on the front. It sold out immediately.
As well. But the I Told You shirt is, I believe, a real-life shirt.
Yes.
From JFK Jr.
Correct. That's
There's
right.
like a paparazzi shot of him wearing the shirt.
Jonathan Anderson found lots of these images and inspired him, and one of them is this I Told You shirt. I mean, it's perfect for Patrick. It's the kind of thing he does all the time. It's so cheeky.
And it's that habit of including what in fashion is called an accessible piece. So that might be 200 or 300 pounds rather than 3,000.
Yeah.
Fashion has always done a version of this. You know, there's Christian Dior couture gowns, and then there's the Christian Dior lipstick. And I know which one anyone I know owns. I think what Jonathan Anderson has done really successfully is to have made both of those things equally cool, if not equally accessible. So the viral T-shirt with the slogan is no longer considered a sort of down market piece. It's just really cool. And if you manage to get one, you're probably a bit of a fanboy because you got up really early to click that link.
How does he articulate what he does and how he does it?
Very thoughtfully. I've been backstage at shows to get quotes from him after catwalk collections, and he is softly spoken, very polite. He's very kind of earnest about what he does because I think he really lives and breathes it.
Creativity will always be the most important thing for me. It's the drug of the job. But you realize that you cannot produce collections that are not going to make money. I do clothing to make it believable. Clothing should not be non-believable. And I think the problem was it was uncomfortable for people. But that's not a bad thing.
He's obviously had great success when he was at Loewe, and as you said earlier, it's literally paid off. But fashion more broadly, luxury fashion, has it been boom years?
I mean, it has, and I think that's possibly why people are remarking now that it's not. There's still a huge amount of money in luxury fashion, but it is experiencing a downturn because of the boom that happened over COVID. Luxury has a sort of very strange and slightly checkered past. We saw the same thing after the crash in 2008, where the luxury sector increased their prices because the people who could afford their goods weren't really affected by the financial crash. It was just the rest of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they did a really similar thing during COVID. I think there was one survey found that prices had hiked by almost 50% in a year. It's very hard to sustain growth like that. So what we're seeing now is a sort of inevitable tailing off of luxury growth, which comes, I think, partly because of what's going on in the world. Inflation is rising everywhere. Spending in China is dropping off a bit. That was always a very big market for luxury fashion. I think tariffs from America are going to impact things that are made in Europe and elsewhere. So the luxury sector is sort of bracing itself because the profits at many of these big labels haven't been great for a while.
Is that why we've seen an element of musical chairs at the top of some of these big brands?
Yes, it is. I read in Vogue that they're calling this September to remember for the number of industry job swaps that have happened. Some have already taken effect, but we'll see most of those first collections from newly installed people this season in September.
And that includes?
That includes, there's been a switch at Gucci. So that was for a long time consistently the best-selling luxury brand in the world for about 10 years under a designer called Alessandro Michele. He has gone to Fendi. Going to Gucci next is a guy called Demna, who's been at Balenciaga. Going to Balenciaga is a man called Pier Paolo Piccioli, who was at Valentino a long time ago. He worked at Valentino with the outgoing designer of Dior, who is Maria Grazia Chiuri, and that is who Jonathan Anderson is taking over from.
But throughout all of this, has Loewe stood out as being a particular success story financially?
Absolutely. I think over 10 years, it's gone from no one really knowing it necessarily. Lots of people never knew how to say it. There was a campaign a long time ago, pre-Jonathan Anderson, of just trying to teach people how to say it.
Yes.
Loewe.
So it certainly wasn't a household name, but I think what he's done there in his first season, I mean, they never used to do clothes. They never used to have a catwalk show even. But he, in his first season, I think focused on what the house was known for, which is bags. And the thing that he came up with is the puzzle bag, which I would say almost instantly strolled into the Handbag Hall of Fame because it completely conceptualised what a handbag might be. He started by cutting the leather flat and then working it into a shape rather than doing it in planes, if that makes sense. So it's a kind of tessellating bunch of panels. You can wear it 5 ways. It's a shoulder bag, a messenger. It can be a kind of a rucksack, a clutch, a sort of top-handled. And I think it was that kind of level of consideration that made Loewe what it is now, because I think Anderson was constantly thinking of a slightly different type of luxury customer. It was one who existed in the real world and was slightly more cooler for it, because that puzzle bag is not for someone who has a driver necessarily. It's not cheap, but it's also
How much is it?
I think when the puzzle bag first launched, it would have been about £1,500, and I think inflationary pressure means that they're now probably about two.
Right.
But that is, I would say, average for the industry. You know, a Chanel bag has gone up in the same amount of time from about £4,000 to nearly 9 now.
Blimey, you get a small family car for that. So now he's off to go and head up Dior, described as the biggest job in fashion, running both the men's and the women's. Is that the case?
It's certainly one of the most prestigious, and it's one of the most public as well. I think Dior is one of those houses that everyone's heard of, whether you are into fashion or not. So yeah, the eyes are on him.
He's got his first deadline, his first show coming up very soon. How is Dior at the moment? I mean, what kind of things is it doing? How much is it setting me back?
Dior is one of those labels that I think everyone has an idea of what it looks like or what it should look like. And that's what I think makes it such a difficult and public job. It's very famous for that new look that Christian Dior came out with in 1947, which is a small waist and a big full skirt. It's a very feminine label. There's a lot of florals going on often. So modernising it is what every designer comes in to do without losing these kind of traditional feminine codes.
Christian Dior, rewind on him for us. Who was he?
He was probably alongside Chanel, he's probably the most important fashion designer of the 20th century. Before he set up his own label, he worked as a designer at various other very prestigious French couture houses. While he was working in couture in Paris during the occupation, his sister was actually part of the resistance. She was captured by the Nazis. I think she was tortured. She was sent to a concentration camp. But she became partly, I think, inspiration for some of the kind of more youthful and optimistic designs that he created after the war. His most famous moment, perhaps, is this, what was called the New Look in 1947. And it was a moment, I think, in French culture of being optimistic about the future and of talking about the industry and the skills that the country had after the war. But it was shocking and outrageous to many people beyond France because of the amount of fabric it used at a time when many countries were still deep in rationing. So to then come out in 1947 with these sort of giant circle skirts with quite a lot of kind of ruffles and layers underneath and these very carefully tailored jackets was to say, look how much money I've got.
Since Christian Dior's day, though, how has it been for the brand? How's it fared?
There's been a succession of designers, but I think the appointment of John Galliano in 1996 was a real moment, not just for Dior, but also for the fashion industry more broadly. Catwalk shows used to be basically like trade shows. They were for press and buyers and not much else. And what John Galliano did, as well as sort of creating these incredible kind of theatrical sets and amazing, like, dramatic costumes, I suppose, for the models in them, he really amped up shows into sort of celeb-tastic, front row, get a load of this. He was such a showman. He made himself part of the action as well. He always took his bow dressed as a matador or an astronaut. And he made fashion sort of Zoolander fabulous, I would say. So when he was given that job, I think lots of very polite French society was really shocked because he was British. He was working class South London. He went to Central St Martin's and he was a bit of a club kid. He'd never sort of really run a successful business. And so to entrust this wild partying youngster with the keys to this august Parisian house, it was quite a moment. But what he did for that brand was to amp it up into extraplanetary glamour.
That somewhat ended in tears in 2011 when he was sacked because of an anti-Semitic rant that was heard about on the streets of Paris.
He was probably the first instance, I would say, of internet cancellation. That footage emerged and it was everywhere.
And then after that, how has it fared?
I think what's interesting to note about the Galliano episode and his being let go so dramatically is that it started a conversation about the pressure put on designers. Anderson has said that he will be carrying on. He's doing men's and women's at Dior. He's also doing his own brand. And he does a sort of capsule range at Uniqlo twice a year as well. So it's a lot of pressure.
I've been in Paris. I've been working in Milan on another project. So yeah, it's going full on. And we're straight into the next Women's Wear show.
Yeah.
So I haven't really
had time to think. Oh, you need a holiday.
But it's all good, you know. I'm still smiling, so I'm sure that's a better thing.
After Galliano left, there was a kind of interregnum without a designer for a while. And then Dior brought in a really well-respected Belgian designer called Raf Simons, who is a real fashion industry darling. He makes very quietly beautiful clothes, and his Dior was very, very gorgeous. But I think even he felt the pressure, and he didn't stay that long. The outgoing designer, Maria Grazia Chiuri, came in. She was the first woman to take that job. That felt like a step forward for fashion as well. And she definitely brought a woman's eye. So we saw viral slogan T-shirts with the motto, "We should all be feminists," across them, with those sort of almost like tulle ballerina skirts worn with very chunky boffer boots. Although Dior's a very feminine label, I don't think it's ever been feminist before, and she managed to do that.
So Jonathan Anderson arriving at Dior, you said there were all these codes and I guess themes inherent in the brand that would have to toy with. What kind of things and what might we expect from him?
It's really hard to say what we can expect from him because I think, is a designer who thrives on doing the unexpected. You know, his final show at Loewe included slogan T-shirts that were actually made of feathers, and the slogans were sort of printed onto the feathers. I mean, it really kind
Not usual.
Not usual, but almost couture level stuff. And I think when people watching that collection realised that was him saying, "Okay, I'm ready now."
Yeah.
So it's really hard to know what to expect. There are definitely items in the sort of Dior vocabulary that we can presume that we will see. There's this bar jacket, which is strong-shouldered, nipped in at the waist. There's often a sort of circle midi skirt, the other half of that new look ensemble. There's often a lot of florals. There's a lot of gowns. I suspect what Anderson will want to do is not riff on other designers' more recent work. He'll want to do something that looks entirely fresh and like his own work.
Has it been a tough recent history for Dior or not?
Dior is so massive. The money involved is so huge. I don't think things have been tough. I think at many fashion labels, one can sense when a label isn't necessarily part of the conversation as much. Every so often we get this data through from various kind of retail analysts that tell us what are the coolest labels online. And for probably 4 or 5 years, it's been Miu Miu, which is another brand run by the woman who started Prada, by Miuccia Prada. And most recently, I think it was this summer, Loewe knocked Miu Miu off the top as the most hyped, the coolest. But I guess brands like Dior and Chanel are more prestigious. They're sort of more august. But I think they are now realising they want to be part of this hype conversation as well.
That's quite an exciting marriage then, if you have proper established history with the hype man of the day.
Totally. It's really, really interesting. I think for fashion nerds, the season coming up in September is going to be one to watch.
Baby, I'm an icon. I'm an icon. Baby, I'm an icon.
How quickly is sort of Jonathan Anderson's influence on Dior actually going to bear fruit? Is it right that he's got a show sort of 27th of June?
Yeah,
that seems really quick.
That's a menswear show.
How big a moment will that be?
It will absolutely be a moment, and it will be full of key insights into what he might be bringing to the house. He said in the past that he really doesn't enjoy designing dresses and that he's not very interested in evening wear either, which is interesting because those are quite big parts of Dior. So maybe he's decided to pivot. But I think what he meant when he was saying that is that the things he likes to focus on are wardrobe items that you can wear again and again. It isn't about a statement dress, a statement frock. So I think what we might see in menswear are probably some really good jackets. But again, it's harder to say beyond that because the inspiration is so esoteric with him. It can come from anywhere.
Yes, CC tomatoes. It won't shock you to know I've never been to a fashion show. They seem like incredibly enormous, expensive moments. I went to university next to Somerset House, so every so often when Fashion Week would descend on there, I could just see how much money and the constant rapid fire of champagne corks popping.
That's changed.
It seems like a lot of money for these brands.
It's a huge...
Is it still worth it?
It's a huge amount of money. Those shows in London are small fry compared to what he'll be doing at Dior, what he's been doing at Loewe, in fact. For brands at that level, shows are absolutely worth it because they provide not just to showcase next season's clothes, that's almost the least of it, but they provide a viral brand moment that you can revisit again and again.
It's a content mine.
Oh, the content is endless content. The past few seasons at Loewe, Jonathan Anderson has built a giant marquee inside the Château de Vincennes, which is outside Paris. 1 year it was covered in musical notes, like a musical manuscript. It's been a kind of big mirror box before. Inside it's just a sort of empty white cube, and then the collection is sort of shown against this blank space. There was one season, I think, when all of the walls were covered in kind of Renaissance portraits because that had been his inspiration that season. Yeah, so they're enormous.
But worth it.
For the brands, they're worth it, absolutely.
Yeah. Just finally, I'm unlikely to be buying anything from Dior. I haven't bought anything from Loewe. And who knows, the person listening to this might not engage with those brands. I wonder how you would explain their cultural importance. Is there an element of this filtering down to everyday culture?
It does reach the high street eventually, and it reaches the public conscious even more quickly than that. I think for all that Jonathan Anderson's style, especially at his own label, is very quirky and off-kilter and challenging to wear, perhaps, there are pieces from his catwalks that are in high street shops now, basically. He did a pair of slip-on loafer clogs with a giant gold buckle on the front, some of them aligned with shearling, which to me doesn't sound outre anymore because I feel like everyone wears the Birkenstock version of them.
Yeah.
But when he did them, they were very different.
Yes.
There are versions of those shoes absolutely everywhere now, and there's so many things that Jonathan Anderson has done that has turned out like that, a kind of resurrection of retro sort of 70s sportswear. He did that kind of shell suit shape a few seasons ago. He also did, I don't know whether you had a pair of these, but I did the wellies with the frog eyes on the front.
No.
No? I mean, I had them as a child, not as a fashion, not as a fashion editor. But he did like a clog with those frog eyes on. And that was massive.
Yeah.
Yeah, people loved them. And that was accessible at about £200.
Wow. So just finally, do you think that there are the ingredients there to buck the financial headwinds and actually make a really big success of all of this?
I think, I think that all of the ingredients are there. I think he's a really talented designer. I think it's a really interesting moment. But I guess also it's really interesting to speak about him as a British designer at this moment. I think lots of people think fashion is, over in the corner doing its weird stuff. But I think if there was a British film director winning a Best Film Oscar, we would be talking about him. And I think if there was a Brit in charge of Volkswagen, we would be talking about him as well. Dior in France is the equivalent of Volkswagen in Germany.
Yeah.
And to have a Brit in charge of it or leading what it looks like is a really exciting moment.
Harriet Walker, fashion editor for The Times. More from her at thetimes.com on sartorial trends and much beyond. Do subscribe to us for free on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Our next episode then will land into your phone without you even needing to think about it. That is it from us today. Today's producer was Anna Dowell, the executive producer was Molly Guinness, and sound design was by David Crackles, and theme music was by Mal Assetto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.